and welcome to the Hybrid School Builders Podcast. I am your host, Rebecca Foley, and I am so glad you are joining me today. I am a fellow grassroots founder who is hoping to make your journey toward founding a sustainable hybrid school a little bit easier. If you are dreaming of starting a hybrid school, or perhaps you've already gotten started, you are in the right place. Join me as we dive into real stories, practical tips, and hard-won lessons that I have learned to help you launch and grow your program with confidence. Remember, building a hybrid school is not just about creating a business or creating jobs. It's not even about just serving the children who attend the program. It's literally about reshaping the landscape of education, and we can do that one community, one entrepreneur, and one program at a time. One of the foundational groundwork pieces that you need to have in place after you have your planning and your budget and your market validation done, which most of season 1 was about that, as well as some stuff about nonprofits and costs and budgets and all of that. But as you're getting into, and I'm going to be focusing most of this season about the actual hitting the ground, you've validated your market. You feel pretty good about this is going to work. You've done a little bit of facility searching probably because you've worked out a budget. People are responding well. You know how much roughly you're going to be charging to make sure you get paid and everybody else gets paid and all the bills get paid. So you have that basic model set up with the costs accounted for, and you've tested the market with some informational type meetings and talking to people, and you're throwing out that ballpark number, you're telling them a little bit about your model, and you are getting good feedback. People are interested, you're keeping in touch with them. Okay. So you feel like, okay, I can do this. There's a market for this. People want this. I'm going to make it happen. All right. By the way, I am working on a course for this right now. It's almost done. And if you're interested, if you feel like you're there at that point and you'd like to walk through it with the course, I am looking for some people to go through the course kind of in this first round. I might still be developing things as I get feedback from people. And there would also be some coaching with that, like some calls with it. If you're interested in that, please go to my website and fill out the form or email me, because I would like a handful of people to go through that and give me feedback on it. But it will walk you through things from facility agreements and filing paperwork to admissions and hiring and a whole bunch of things, handbooks and all this stuff you have to think about. Anyway, so if you're interested, let me know. Okay, so back to the facility. This is one of the first things that you have to do when you're sure that you're going to follow through on this plan and make it happen, okay? Now, I did a couple episodes earlier about looking for a facility, working with a church as a facility. This advice is going to be applicable to both of them as far as setup and stuff, but a lot of it is going to be if you're doing kind of an informal sort of agreement where you're kind of writing it yourself, you're not working with a lawyer to do a commercial lease, which a commercial rental, you would be doing that for sure. But if you're working like a youth camp or a private facility or a church or something like that, a fellow nonprofit, and you're working, like sharing the facility and it's kind of a common missional thing, you're probably going to end up working out an agreement together that's not an official lease. But I wanted to give you some tips on the sort of things that you want to make sure that you write down to prevent misunderstanding as much as possible and to make sure that there's clarity and just things to think about, okay? So, you can think about this with a church, which is a very common situation, but it might be true for any kind of, especially in a shared situation where you're going to be sharing the building, it's not entirely yours. Now, if the building is entirely yours, either because you're renting it full time or it's your own personal property, or you just got lucky enough that you don't have to share it with anybody and you can set it up wherever you want. Some of the things you just have to think about with that are just the safety sort of things and like locking doors and kind of traffic flow if you have more than a few cars pulling in and out, and like where the kids are getting dropped off and whether the kids can get in and out during the day and whether the doors are locked, whether other adults can get in and out during the day, which obviously you don't want. That kind of thing is stuff you're going to have to think about in any building, but you probably don't have to write it down if it's not a shared situation. If you're in a shared situation, you're going to have to write that down. So I'm just going to hit on some of the things that I think you should put in an agreement. I have a sample about this in the course, and I go through it in a little more detail, but I'm just going to hit on some of the things. So you want to be really clear about who you are and what you do, just so that anyone who's for instance, in a church, maybe you meet with 1 or 2 staff members, but then you have an entire congregation and possibly like bookkeepers or Sunday school people or other people who are in the building, using the building, and they don't really maybe understand who these people are who are using their classrooms or how many people are in the building or how many days or whether the parents are there or not. If you really clarify just in the beginning, this is agreement between your name and their name, and then you clarify if your drop-off program, how many days a week you meet, the hours that you need access, whether the parents are legally homeschooling or not. You can even mention the number of employees you have, that kind of thing. And you want to also put in like a general calendar date, like what months of the year are you meeting and all of that, okay? You want to spell out the parts of the building you have access to. You want to name like closets. You want to name doors, okay? And you, obviously, well, just to make sure that this is obvious, you want to talk about this and like negotiate it in person with the people, especially in a shared situation. You might have to have a couple of meetings. You have to make sure that it's the right people you're talking to. That's so important. The people who really, are there and care about this and are using the same space, and the people who have some degree of authority in these things. But you want to talk about all this in negotiations, but then you also want to write it down. So you're going to be jotting down notes as you talk, and you're going to be filling out this document, and then everyone's going to read it again. Your side, their side, so everybody knows you have access to the kitchen, to which doors are you allowed to use, which bathrooms are you allowed to use, are the doors locked during the day? All of that stuff, it all needs to be written down. Are you allowed to store things in the closets? Are you allowed to leave the classroom set up? Now, a lot of those things, as I'm naming them, hopefully you're like, these are desirable things. You should have the doors locked during the day, right? You do want to be able to leave your classroom set up if at all possible. It's much, much easier to run your program in a high quality, non-burning out sort of way if you can leave most of your basic equipment and structure there. So you're going to spell that out, all right? And again, a lot of this is applicable if you're sharing, which is, it can be a difficult thing to share space, but it's very common and it's usually the most affordable way to do things. So you just have to work out a good relationship. You want to put in your payments. Now, whatever the expected payment is, you want to put in if payment changes, when are they going to tell you that? If costs go up or they're like, oh, you guys are costing us more than we thought. Maybe you're running the heat more, the air conditioning more, using more toilet paper, paper towels or whatever. When should they let you know about that? You don't want them telling you that too late in the year when maybe you needed to bump your tuition up a teeny bit just to cover an increase in rent or an increase in costs or utilities or something. You need to know that early enough that you can plan. Okay, so you want to put a date in that, how much the payments are in general, when they're due. You want to talk about cleaning. You want to talk about emergencies. We're writing all of this down. Okay, who do you call if something happens, if a toilet overflows? Okay, if there's any other kind of emergency, the heat system breaks or whatever, who are you supposed to call? Again, in a shared situation, or even if you're renting the space, who's the contact person? What's the expectation for them responding? All of that stuff, you want to clearly know who it is. And the same goes for them. And if they tell somebody that, these tables need to be put away and they go in this closet, and we need to make sure that this is swept up because our women's Bible study is meeting here tomorrow morning, and they say that to somebody who's not actually in a position of authority or in a position of being able to make that happen or tell the right people, that can cause all kinds of miscommunication and frustration. So you want to make sure that you're writing down, like, who do you go tell? Who do they tell? Who's actually in charge of making sure that everything is cleaned up and locked up when you guys leave the building, okay? So you want to write down names. You want to write down all of that, okay? Again, I brought up safety a few times. Clearances. Do you want clearances for the people who are, if they're staff members, possibly in church sharing situations? Sometimes there's a secretary or a pastor, or sometimes a whole team of people who are using the building, often at the same time as the children. So do you want clearances for them? Do you want copies of that? I mean, the churches should have all of that stuff if there's any children around. So do you want to make sure that you have copies of that? You might want to talk about anybody else who has access to the church building during the day. Like, are people able to just walk in off the street? depending where the building is. What about utility people? Someone who just came to fix the heater. Are they going to tell you? Because what if they're in the hallway with the kids or they're wandering around looking for it and you don't know who they are, right? So these kind of things, like, you just want to be able to communicate that. Like, please let us know if anyone else is going to be in the building. Doesn't mean they can't come necessarily. Like, if something needs to get fixed, it needs to get fixed. But just so you know, so there isn't just somebody who you don't know who this person is, right, in the building with the kids. Bathroom access, open and close doors, locking doors, all of that kind of thing. Who has keys? You want to write all of that down after negotiating it. You want to talk about liability insurance. You should be carrying your own liability insurance as an organization. You can put the building on as a carrier, and you provide them with a copy of the insurance so that they know you have your own insurance, like liability insurance on the kids. Always spell out communication, people, and, calendars and dates and times. Any kind of evening event you might have, or a Saturday event you have. Who do you talk to? How far in advance do you need to get permission for that kind of thing? If the agreement ends, like maybe next year the building doesn't want you back, or you find a different building and they did want you back or something, what kind of notice do you need, right? You can't have a building pulling out in January and saying, yeah, we don't like you guys here. You got to leave in February, right? You want to write it down that that's not acceptable. You need to at least be able to finish up your school year. It's at least a 1-year contract. As much as possible for your own stability and your own planning, it's good to have probably at least 3 years if you possibly can. But you definitely want some sort of notice for that anybody changing plans on you, because it takes a long time to find another building, and it takes, it just shakes things up. It shakes up your budget, shakes up your planning a lot, and you need that stability. So you need warning on that. Okay. So those are the things that I would put into just a basic agreement. I mean, you can write all this out in just a couple pages, and you make sure that they sign it. You make sure you each have a copy of it. That way you can always just go back to it and say, oh, we talked about that. This is here. And anything else that comes up in conversation, you say, well, let's just write that down. Is it okay if we write that down? Just to give abundant clarity on what the arrangements are and who to contact and who has the authority to say things that something is going to happen or not going to happen or whatever. You want to just be abundantly clear on those things. Search that kind of informal sort of agreement. Usually there's some tax implications if churches are officially leasing. It can just get a little bit into some gray areas with that kind of thing. So generally it ends up just being an agreement. It's kind of a handshake agreement from the best of my understanding. I'm not a lawyer, so don't quote me as a lawyer on this, but it's kind of a handshake agreement. But it's a written down agreement. But whether or not it holds up as an official contractual lease in a court of law, I am not going to say that that's necessarily true with this kind of arrangement, but you still want to have things written down as much as possible. It just smooths the path for everything and allows proactive conversations. And again, if you're not in a sharing situation, you still want to think about most of these things, right? But you might not have as much complexity to communication and emergencies. It's more clear who's in charge of what, and you don't have those sharing issues with setup and access to the building and all of that kind of thing where you have 2 different groups using it at the same time. So you can simplify some of that, in which case you're probably just renting the space and it's more of just a rental agreement. Okay, so hopefully that was helpful as you're setting up your facility, which is one of the major groundwork pieces that you have to have in place in order to open. Thanks so much for listening today. Don't forget to subscribe and make sure you check out the resources I am developing at startahybridSchool.com. Send me an email anytime. I would love to hear from you. Until next time.